Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, we're going to answer your questions about a whole bunch of different things, including clutch hitting, the Dodgers radio broadcast team, David Price, Trevor Bauer, prospects, Jake Lamb, so much more. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. This is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening so you never miss a day, because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time listening or watching, my name is Jeff Snider. My co-host over there is Vince Samperio. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, which is probably a good thing. But we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. So again, please subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And let's talk about the Dodgers. And Vince, this is a momentous day for me. This is my first time in the YouTube era of this podcast doing a show without a Dodger hat on. I just didn't feel like putting my hat on, you know?
Yeah, sometimes I don't get this feeling, but sometimes people do get that feeling. And, your hairline's still pretty much strongly intact, so you're good.
Yeah, the color of the hair isn't what I would like. I remember back when I used to have brown hair, and now it's mostly just gray. But yeah, the hairline's doing okay, better than my dad's or my grandpa's. So fingers crossed on that. And I always think of that line from George of the Jungle, the old movie from the '90s with Brendan Fraser and Leslie Mann. And he said, "George just feel like looking pretty, I guess." I think my hair looks nice tonight, so I'm leaving the head off. But beyond that, we're going to be taking listener questions today. We put out a call. Actually, before we even put out a call, a couple of our listeners who listened to yesterday's episode proactively sent us questions. We're going to get to those, plus a few more who did send us questions in response to your call for questions. No real Dodger news to talk about first. Austin Barnes' home run ended up being the third longest home run in Major League Baseball the weekend. Probably the first and last time you will ever see Austin Barnes on any list like that. And then the only other news is that it seems like maybe the weather in Minnesota is maybe going to think about cooperating. So the Dodgers might be able to get one or both of those two games in. But other than that, no real news, right, Vince?
Nope. Dodgers didn't play. There was a few other teams playing. Padres and Giants currently playing right now. But no Dodgers news.
All right. So let's jump straight into our questions. We may not get to all of them. We kind of, sometimes there's repeats, sometimes there's stuff we've just talked about or whatever. But this one from our buddy Michael Whitman at Whitman7, he asks, assuming Trevor Bauer gets a suspension and serves it, would you welcome him back to the team? And then there was a little back and forth, and he clarified because our buddy Brandon Johnson apparently was trying to channel me, and apparently as a fan of my wishy-washy answers, because Brandon said that my answer would probably be, depends on what you mean by welcome. And so Michael said, okay, then would you want him to pitch for the Dodgers? So thanks a lot for that, Brandon. And Michael, thanks for the question. And now let's answer it.
Yeah, this is the question that, or the topic we've talked about probably the most in the off season. And, I don't know. It's just a weird situation. If he ends up not getting, if MLB, I guess it's going to depend on what MLB ends up being. If it's a very long suspension and he agrees to it or fights it and ends up still losing, then clearly something, they didn't see something that they liked and that, went against their policy. In that sense, he did do something wrong, and, I'm probably not in favor of it. If they don't give him a crazy long suspension and he doesn't fight it, then that means whatever they found or whatever happened, it might just, I don't know how they're going to play this out. They did retroactively for Osuna last year. We saw Julio get some time a few years ago for something that we still don't know exactly what happened. But I think for me personally, I don't know if I'm ever going to be like, oh, yes, Trevor Bauer, go Trevor Bauer. If he's pitching for the Dodgers, I'll be rooting for the Dodgers that day. And if he does well, obviously that benefits the Dodgers. I think that's where I'm at. I think if he comes back, okay, I'll accept it. Obviously, I don't have a say in it anyways. For me, I believe that means that the team wanted him back or was at least willing to bring him back. And I'm not part of the team. So if it's good enough for them to allow him to come back, assuming that's how it goes, then, like I said, I'm not going to be wearing Trevor Bauer gear, but I will be, I guess, accepting it. I don't want to be wishy-washy. I guess I would accept whatever the decision is.
Yeah, wishy-washiness is my territory. I was kind of inclined to kind of feel the same way you do about, well, let's see what happens with MLB's investigation. Then I realized I don't necessarily want to outsource my opinions to an organization like MLB that I don't necessarily have the most faith in or respect for. But I'm really bummed that Trevor Bauer lost his hearing last week to have his accusers' text records turned over, just because I would have liked to have more information. I am conflicted on how to feel about Trevor Bauer because I don't know what happened. And that's frustrating for me. I do, based on reading his lawsuit, and maybe we'll get more information from that lawsuit. I don't know, but there's some really good points made in his lawsuit about how some members of the media seem to have had it out for him based on things that, a good example. The other day, Andrew McCutchen got hit by a pitch, bench is cleared in the Brewers game against whichever team they're currently have a rival with, the Cubs. And somebody on Twitter told McCutchen, there's no way he was throwing at you, you calm down or whatever. And Andrew McCutchen quote tweeted her and said, all due respect, mind your business. And nothing came of it. Can you imagine if Trevor Bauer had done the same thing? But because, Andrew McCutchen, and I'm not saying anything should have come down on McCutchen. Longtime listeners know Andrew McCutchen is one of my favorite non-Dodgers in baseball. I love Andrew McCutchen. But it's that same basic thing. If Trevor Bauer had done that, partly because Trevor Bauer's followers are maybe a less mature crowd, to put it kindly. And so probably that lady would have gotten piled on if Trevor Bauer had quote tweeted the same way. But Bauer doing the same exact thing that McCutchen did would have been perceived differently if it was Bauer because of Bauer's reputation. And that's probably not fair. And so, if I look at things in a vacuum, the thing with the Deadspin printed a couple of years ago about how Trevor Bauer's been harassing this college girl for the last 24 hours, when really he had tweeted at her like 3 times. And then the rest was just him replying to a Twitter thread that she happened to be tagged in. And so she was getting the replies, but they're like, he's tweeted at her 47 times in the last 24 hours. No, he hasn't. He's responding to a Twitter thread. And yeah, if he was more mature, we've talked about this before. If he was more mature, more secure, yeah, he probably would have just let that go and not responded at all to the thread. But to try to make it targeted harassment is a big stretch. And so that's kind of the MO with the media, or at least certain members of the media, treating Trevor Bauer that way. And so everything he does gets turned into a big national case. And so I don't know how much of that element is at play in this situation. I don't know how much, because his lawsuit says the Athletic knew that his accusers' injuries weren't as bad as they reported them to be, and yet they reported them to be that anyway. If that's true, that sucks, And so my opinion of Trevor Bauer has already forever changed, just because, until you know certain things, you can pretend that they're all saints who go to church every week and call and tell their mom they love them every night before bed, and now that we know Trevor Bauer at the best, he's cavorting with women he barely knows in ways that personally I reserve for my wife. We've got to keep this G rating on this podcast on YouTube so we can stay monetized. But at the very best, he's doing things that I don't approve of morally, but probably a lot of players in Major League Baseball are. And so if he didn't do what he's accused of doing, I don't have a problem with him staying on the Dodgers, with the understanding that if we knew the personal lives of all players, there are plenty of people who we wouldn't approve of necessarily.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it sits. It's out of our hands anyways, and everyone's gonna feel a different type of way, and everyone's inclined to feel a different type of way. But at this point, it compared to where we were a few months ago to where we are now, it really seems like Trevor Bauer is going to come back and pitch for the Dodgers at some point this year.
It does seem like that. All right. And speaking of coming back, we're going to come back in a minute. We have a lot more questions of yours to answer. So thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. And please keep it Locked On Dodgers. Let's talk about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Please check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. All right, Vince, you want to read us our next question?
Yes, let's get to it. Let's go to Eric Ball at eball_br. One of my coworkers, he's actually a Reds fan, but that's a good question. What's the ideal outcome of David Price's season?
I mean, ideal is he wins the Cy Young Award, right? And pitches Game 7 of the World Series. I don't care which Dodger wins Game 7 of the World Series, as long as it's a Dodger. Actually, let's go with Game 4 in a sweep.
Yeah,
that's even more ideal. But more realistic for David Price. I mean, really, the Dodgers either finding a way for him to contribute or finding somebody to take him off their hands is really what it boils down to. He's one of the, I almost said one of the few pitchers, but I guess there's probably 9 pitchers on the Dodger staff we didn't see in Colorado because they have so many pitchers on the roster right now. David Price is not one that we've seen yet. I assume since Mitch White got pressed into action on Sunday, so he's out as a long reliever type. Maybe that increases the chances of or the odds of Price pitching, although he's not a long reliever at this point. It may not be at all. He's really a one inning guy. And so I don't even know when we're going to see him, but really my expectations for David Price are relatively low, and I'd like to be pleasantly surprised, but my expectations are just make little contributions here and there when he's healthy and fill a roster spot and pitch some important innings, even if it's not very many.
Yeah, I'll go quick. Assuming health and mainly assuming health, I think my ideal outcome would be for him to pitch well enough to get traded. The Dodgers eat some of the salary, and they still allow their young arms to come up and fill in as the season goes on.
Yeah. Next question from our buddy Gavin DeLuhosh at GDeLuhosh on Twitter. He says, so far, we're seeing a familiar boom and bust pattern with this lineup. Any thoughts as to why this is? I know it's the smallest of sample sizes and it's Colorado, but it feels like it's been like this for nearly 4 years now.
Yeah, let's see, 2018. Yeah, okay, 4 years. Because 2017, though, this team was very methodical offensively. And, then it seemed like at the end of the day, no matter what, the Dodgers were putting up 5-6 runs. I think that's how this team can get. Obviously, they anchored by the big inning over the weekend, the 11 runs, like we mentioned yesterday, 9 of them scored in 2 separate innings. But I think that's what Freddie Freeman's supposed to bring. Obviously, he's only played 3 games. He's supposed to bring that element of consistency to the top of the lineup. Mookie Betts, healthy, is supposed to be a consistent guy as well. Trey Turner won the batting champion last year. He was a batting champion last year and is, hitting 338, so almost on base 4 times out of every 10 at bat, or 4 out of every 10 at bats almost. So I would imagine that it's not going to be boomer bust like it has been now. I would imagine it's supposed to even out, but that's just the way it goes. And in terms of the last 4 years, it's always a matter of how I remember it. I get if realistically we went down and broke down all the numbers, it probably wouldn't be that way, but you can tell where there was certain years. 2018 was just a weird year in general, where it seemed like they relied on the home run, if I'm not mistaken. 2019 they were really good, had a bunch of comebacks though. So it took 2019 they were pretty dominant in the later innings, and then 2020 shorter season obviously, but they were pretty. That was similar to 2017. They were just really good and really methodical. And then last year, Yeah, it was just another one of those weird years. But it's different when you watch somebody every single day. When you watch these teams every single day, you lose a little bit of perception, and I think it happens to all of us. And we can find the numbers and break them down, but just realistically, I do think this offense won't be boom or bust as mentioned by Gavin.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like you were saying, my one quibble would be I don't think it's been this way for the last 4 years. 2018, I think, soured a lot of us or put this perception in our minds. And, I joke sometimes that every baseball fan thinks that their team has the worst bullpen and the worst performance with runners in scoring position and the worst manager. And, and I think those things are true among Dodger fans a lot of the time because in 2020 and 2021, the Dodgers were like extremely, extremely good with runners in scoring position. And yet you still have people who will swear on their deathbed that the Dodgers are always terrible with runners in scoring position. And it's like you said, we remember the negatives. We don't remember the positives. I think 2018 was boomer bust. 2021 was mostly boomer bust. I think 2019 and 2020 were anything but. And I do expect this year, I really do think the first series comes down to it's 3 games in Colorado. So who knows what's going to happen. But there's no reason to think that this is actually a pattern that is likely to repeat.
Yeah. Speaking of Colorado and question from Kevin at Blue Goon 82. He says, I know Jeff isn't concerned because of Coors Field, but Julio had the same 90-mile-an-hour fastball during spring. Is there any concern regarding how his arm might be reacting a year after his highest innings pitched of his career?
Kevin obviously is a listener, although he did not quite pick up why I said I'm not concerned. Basically, I said I'm not concerned yet because my assumption right now is that Julio's velocity is down because he's still getting built up and it still feels like spring training to his arm. And 2 or 3 starts from now is when I would start to get concerned. If he is still throwing this slow in a couple starts from now, then yeah, I will start to have concerns about the workload last year. People talked all year last year about how will Julio react next year, because basically last season he threw more than twice as many innings as he had ever thrown an inning in a season before. And so it was natural to wonder, how's he going to react? And sometimes the effect of that is injury. Sometimes it's decreased velocity or effectiveness. And sometimes there is no effect. And basically my only point right now on Julio is that we don't really have any idea which of those 3 things it's going to be. And even if the velocity is down, we don't know if that's because there is some nagging injury or because, he was overworked. He's only 25 years old. He should be able to throw that many innings. And so I'm not necessarily concerned long-term unless there is some lingering physical issue that's causing the velocity drop. But I don't think we'll know that for a couple weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not concerned at the moment. Talk to me in 3 or 4 weeks, and I could be concerned if it remains the same, but we'll just have to wait and see about it.
Yeah. Next question from the Squib at Solo Ant, and then at least 1 underscore, maybe 2 or 3 even on Twitter. Out of the top prospects, who gets the first call up?
Yeah, this one is, I guess, if we define what the top prospects are, looking at MLB Pipeline and Dodgers prospects, looking at top 5, you got Cartaya, Miller, Bush, Pajes, and Vargas. If you go the next 5, you got Pepio, Knack, Leonard, Vivas, and Wilmon Diaz. If you take it all the way to 11, that's Andre Jackson, and that would probably be my answer just because the Dodgers are realistically going to need pitching before they need hitting, assuming health, obviously. So if you take it all the way to 11 for top prospects, it's Andre Jackson. If you keep it top 10, then it's between Pepio and probably Miguel Vargas. Michael Bush also right there, but I don't know. I don't know if it's because of the hype or how the spring went, but you definitely hear Miguel Vargas' name a lot more than Michael Bush, even though Michael Bush is a little bit older and from what different things we've seen, should be able to hit in the major leagues by this point. But I do think they'll need an arm before they need a bat, and it's going to be Andre Jackson, then Ryan Pepio, and then Miguel Vargas if they do bring up a bat.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is of those 11 guys you listed, only Leonard, Vivas, and Jackson are on the 40-man roster right now. And that is a consideration at times, because if they need a guy for a week or two, they're unlikely to make a 40-man roster move for that. And so, but I don't know that Eddie's Leonard or Jorge Vivas are actually anywhere close to being ready for the big leagues right now.
They're in low A right now,
even though they're on the 40-man roster.
And
so it's kind of the nature of what the Dodgers did this offseason with their 40-man roster was a little bit different than what they've done in previous years. In previous years, we pretty much everybody on the 40-man roster was almost guaranteed to get major league time that year. And that's not going to be the case this year, and so you've got guys like Jacob Amaya, who's on the 40-man roster, isn't nearly as good as some of those other guys we listed, but he's on the 40-man. And so if they need an infielder for a couple of weeks, Jacob Amaya is more likely than Miguel Vargas to get that call, maybe. So, but he's not one of the top prospects. So, when you, that's why I came out, the first thing you said was depends on how you define top prospects. That's for you, Brandon Johnson. I'm wishy-washy.
Jeff.
Let's take a break. Thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. We really appreciate it. And let's talk about Rock Auto. RockAuto.com is an online auto parts dealer. If you ever need auto parts, if you own a car or somebody who owns a car, if you've ever driven down to the auto parts store, you know that it's the worst experience in the world. Well, it's a great experience being on the internet, and RockAuto.com is on the internet. Just go there. You can put in the make and model of your car or truck. It'll pull up a list of everything they have available for your car or truck. You'll find what you need, and you'll look and you say, wow, I think this is cheaper than what I saw down at the AutoZone. And guess what? You'll be right. It's going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to be a lot more convenient. They'll just mail the part to you. You'll spend less. You'll be helping a family-owned business. Everything about rockauto.com is better than everything about going to the auto parts store. I'm not only an advertiser, I am a customer of rockauto.com. I use them every time I need auto parts. And probably the best thing that comes from me hosting this podcast is I found out about Rock Auto, and it saved me a lot of money. So if you want to save a lot of money too, go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. They don't even pay me to sing. I do that on my own. Thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. And let's jump back into these questions, Vincent. You're on mute, Vince.
I was on mute while you were doing your gracious singing. I believe we have some that are suited for you in the DMs, but I'll let you ask, or you have the question, so you can ask it and then answer it.
All right. So we had one from our buddy FLP3. He says, after the opening rough weekend stuff, he says, can we talk about how absolutely abysmal it is to have to listen to Charlie Steiner and Rick Monday? I listen on the at-bat app a lot while riding my bike, and as if Steiner's laissez-faire style of calling games isn't enough, the two of them have gone full-blown get off my lawn about all things technology and baseball. They pissed and moaned for a whole half inning about how stupid the electronic strike zone is, how pointless replay is, pitch calm, etc. Basically, it's a human game. Players make mistakes, coaches make mistakes, and umpires make mistakes too. I wanted to scream. Thanks, Fred, for the question. Full disclosure, I haven't listened to a radio broadcast this regular season yet. I did listen to a lot of Rick Monday during spring training. I like Rick Monday. I have a Rick Monday bobblehead that's probably visible behind me somewhere. I am a big Rick Monday fan. Maybe I have to turn a little bit. Anyway, I like Rick Monday a lot. I don't care much for listening to Rick Monday. And it is that grumpy old man attitude that I don't care much for. I think one of the things I love about Oral Hershiser, and I'm going to try to keep this positive. I don't want it to turn into a bash session. So I'm going to talk about what I love about Oral. Is Oral can have a conversation where he will talk about how things were in his day. And yet his overarching point is, man, baseball's awesome. And so sometimes Oral is saying, I preferred things the way it was back then. Sometimes he's saying, man, things have really improved since I was playing. But overall, his love of baseball is always apparent. I have no doubt that Rick Monday loves baseball, but I do think that love of baseball does not come through in his commentary when he is broadcasting a game, if that makes sense. And that is frustrating for somebody who loves baseball to be listening to a game and hear just a bunch of whining and complaining. And it does come across as grumpy old manish. And whether you want the electronic strike zone or not, whether you like the shift or not, whether you like PitchCom or not, nobody wants to turn on a game and listen to somebody complain for 3 hours. Actually, somebody does. And I think it's old people. And I know I'm approaching the line with all this gray hair, but yeah, I think there is a market for that. And I don't think that market is people roughly my age and younger. I think that, I don't know. I just, as for Charlie Steiner, I love Charlie Steiner. I think he's a great guy. I would love to go have dinner with Charlie Steiner and talk for 6 hours about baseball with him. I think he has a great voice. I think he has a great love of baseball that does come through. I just think he's bad at describing what's happening in a baseball game, which is the number one thing I look for in a radio play-by-play guy. I would love it if on the weekends when Joe Davis goes to call games for Fox, I would love if they had Charlie Steiner do the play-by-play, because Charlie Steiner on a TV game is great because you're not relying on him to know what's happening in the game because you can use your eyeballs. And so you can just, Charlie talking about baseball for 3 hours. Great. Love that. But and maybe Steiner's old manishness rubs off on him on the radio. I don't know. It's been close to a year since I've listened to them together on the radio, but those are my thoughts on that. You have any additional thoughts on any of that, Vince?
I don't have to listen on the radio that often, which is good. Honestly, I'm very good at tuning out what I don't need to hear. And I'll watch broadcast, like even when the games are on ESPN, unless I see something on Twitter or I see, people complaining, I don't even know what they're talking. Like I could not tell you what they're talking about. So I'm pretty good at tuning out when I'm watching. I'm pretty good at tuning out, even on the radio. Once I hear what's happened, I don't really listen to the banter and everything else. So for me personally, I've learned that part of it. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing for me, but yeah, I don't have a strong opinion, but I do think that just based on things I do remember, Rick Monday, he's getting borderline to the point of, all right, Rick, we get it.
Yeah. I just want their love of baseball to shine through. So the other DM question we had was from our buddy Pat Dwyer at The Real PJ Dwyer. He asked, do you believe in clutch hitting as a skill or talent? I read Keith Law's Smart Baseball over the offseason, and he seems to imply that good hitters are good and bad hitters are bad, no matter how many runners are on base or what the game situation is. It's relevant to the topic you discussed today about the Dodgers' performance this past weekend at Coors. Thanks. And I do have a lot of thoughts about this. In general, basically, I agree with Keith Law that clutch hitting is not a repeatable skill. And a lot of people get upset about that, misunderstanding what we're saying. Clutch hitting exists, absolutely. But clutch hitting is not a skill that someone can repeat. And so, Vince, tell me somebody you think of. When you think of famous clutch hitters, who do you think of? Not necessarily Dodgers, just anybody.
David Freese.
David Freese. All right. I'm going to do I didn't think of David Freese while I have some tabs open, but I'm going to pull up David Freese right now, and I'm going to tell you his career splits in clutch situations. Let's look at late and close situations. That sounds like a clutch situation, right? It's the game. It's late in the innings and the game is close. David Freese's TOPS plus is 83. What that means is that David Freese for his career was 17% worse in late and close situations than he was overall. That's just comparing him to himself. 17% worse. High leverage situations. That defines clutch, right? High leverage. TOPS plus of 90. So he was 10% worse than in those situations than he was overall. What do we remember? 2011, the ball to right field to tie the game in Game 6 of the World Series, and then the walk-off home run to win the game. Big clutch hits. We remember the moments. Overall, David Freese, not clutch. Who else? Give me another one, Vince. Another David, maybe? David Ortiz?
Yeah.
Big Papi's famous for being clutch, right? David Ortiz, late and close situations, TOPS plus 88, 12% worse than him overall. High leverage, TOPS plus 103, 3% better. Almost exactly the David Ortiz you get every day is the same you get in high leverage situations. Who else? Maybe a longtime captain of the Yankees, Derek Jeter.
Derek Jeter.
Captain Clutch himself. Derek Jeter, late and close situations, TOPS plus 91. High leverage, 99. The same hitter, maybe a little bit worse in those clutch situations. Everybody. Kirk Gibson, two of the most famous postseason home runs in history in 84 and 88 in the World Series. Kirk Gibson, super clutch, right? Late and close, TOPS plus 95, 5% worse than his overall numbers. High leverage, 92. Everybody you do, and you will sometimes find a guy who has a TOPS plus really high in those high leverage situations. And it's somebody who's not actually very good. And it's just, the longer a person's career is, the more likely. If we look at Derek Jeter's numbers, all of these situations, the clutch stats, so they list all of them. 2 outs and runner scoring position, late and close, tie game, within 1 run, within 2 runs, within 3 runs, within 4 runs, more than 4 runs, ahead, behind, all these things. Guess what? All of Jeter's numbers are between 91 and 103. Why is that? Because over a 20-year career, everybody averages out to be about what they are. And that's Derek Jeter, that's David Ortiz, that's Kirk Gibson, that's David Freese, that's everybody you can think of is essentially, given enough plate appearances, they are who they are, regardless of the situation. And we remember the big moments. We remember Jock Peterson's clutch home runs. We forget Jock Peterson's clutch double plays. We remember the stuff we want to remember. We forget the stuff we want to forget. And that's why numbers are so cool, because it can tell us, hey, look, the actual data tells us that over this big sample size, he was who he was. And the vast majority of players fall into that. He is who he is. He is who we thought they were. They are who they thought we were. Whatever. I'm good with words today. But that's my answer to that question from Pat. No, clutch hitting is not a skill.
Yeah, I will say that. I mean, I'm sure we can cherry pick some stats, but those stats are regular season. So when you do think of David Ortiz, maybe postseason, you'll think of it. Jock Peterson, the one example. We talked about this a couple years ago, where Jock was at that point just like a normal OPS in the postseason. But when you compared it to the rest of the Dodgers, who were very under that, that's why he stood out that much more. Just looking at regular OPS, Jock has a higher OPS in the postseason in about 80 games than he does in his regular season career, by about almost 20 points or somewhere around there. So I think there's some value, but also at the end of the day, like I said, the numbers kind of average out at the end. And obviously we're going to remember when Jock hit, if he hit 2 home runs in a series that were, defined as clutch, we're going to remember that. We're not going to necessarily remember if he struck out 3 times in game 6 of whatever that series was.
Yeah. And that difference between Jock's regular season OPS and his postseason OPS is almost entirely because he had a good 2020 postseason. So I will go on record to say, if Jock Peterson makes the postseason 8 more times in his career, by the end of his career, his postseason performance will look almost exactly the same as his regular season performance. Anyway, does that do it for us today, Vince?
We got a couple more, but maybe we'll save them for later in the week.
Yeah, because we may, depending on how the weather cooperates in Minnesota, we may have more time for questions in the next couple days. So I think that'll do it for today. Thank you all for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. We really appreciate it. For your second listen today, check out Locked On MLB, where Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues past and present. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. If you're not watching or listening to Locked On Dodgers every day, we would love it if you add 1 or 2 days a month to your rotation. If you have friends or family who love the Dodgers as much as you do, please tell them about the show. They might love the show as much as you do. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I am on Twitter at Snider, and the DMs are open in all of those places. Our email address is lockedondodgers@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us via text or voicemail at 323-863-LOCK-5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you will be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.